thanks for that introduction from one Eagle Scout to another. I appreciate it. It is an honor to be here today. I got to tell you, I get asked all the time. Jeanette and I, we've got two boys, a junior and senior in high school at a public school in Wauwatosa. Talked to them this morning, and as they're way in school, and we get asked all the time with all that's going on, with all the craziness and that, how do you put up with it? Someone on the way here earlier today did what happens to me just about every day in Wisconsin. Whether I'm at a factory or a farm or small business, I get someone who will come up and say, Governor, just want to let you know that me and my family, we pray for you. And I got to tell you, that means the world to us. So thank you for all of you who do that. We appreciate that. I'm obviously from just up the way in Wisconsin, but I've got some roots just south of the border. I grew up near the state line in Delavan, small town, about 7,000 folks. In fact, you get a kick out of this. Paul Ryan grew up in Janesville. That was a big city for us. I grew up in Delavan, about 15 miles down the road. The other side of us grew up Reince Priebus and Kenosha. So there must have been something in the water back at that time. But funny story about Paul. He and I flipped hamburgers at McDonald's about the same time. But his manager told him, what maybe mine thought just didn't tell me, his manager told me he flipped hamburgers instead of working the front because he didn't have the interpersonal skills. I'm sure when he gave the response to the president last year to the State of the Union, that manager and probably the high school basketball coach that cut Michael Jordan were both having a drink somewhere. Mistakes that they made. But I thought, to start off, and obviously I want to share about we're to try to take our state forward instead of going backwards, and hopefully how we can inspire some of those same ideas here in Illinois to help you go forward as well. But I thought, how do you bond, the states where, we've got the Packers, you've got the Bears, what could bring us together? It's the Vikings, right? And I always, I think back to last fall when I was stopped in a bar to watch a football game, and down at the end of the bar, the bar owner had on the Vikings playing, and this guy came in the door kind of surprised because he brought his dog in the bar. And the bartender said, animals aren't allowed. And he said, oh, come on. He said, my dog is such a Vikings fan, you got to let him watch the game. He said, okay, but stay way down at the other end of the bar, away from all the patrons. So the Vikings go marching down the field. Suddenly they get in the red zone. They kick a field goal. The ball goes straight through. The dog goes wild. He's up and down in the bar stool, howling away, jumping around. Bartender comes down to the guy and says, hey, I'm sorry. I had no idea your dog really was a Vikings fan. He gets that excited over a field goal. What does he do for a touchdown? The owner of the dog thought for a second. He said, I don't know. I've only had him for 2 years. It made me think about the other day. I was up near the St. Croix River, the northwest part of Wisconsin, and I saw a guy there who admitted he was a Vikings fan, and he said his great wish, sometime in the future, an older guy in his 90s, he said at some point he was hoping that he could get the pallbearers at his funeral to all be members of the Minnesota Vikings football team. He said he thought it would only be appropriate that they let him down one last time. But on a serious note, for us, I just was talking last week, going around our state, talking about the choice that we're going to have in a couple of weeks at the beginning of June, on June 5th. And for us, it's real simple. Do we go back to the days of double-digit tax increases, billion-dollar budget deficits, and record job loss? Or do we take the positive foundation that we built the past year to move our state forward? And that's really the choice in Wisconsin. Do you go forward or backwards? And I want to spend a couple minutes this morning here talking about that, and talking about some of the challenges I think that you have here in the state of Illinois, and how you can take action to move forward as well. When I came in last year, as mentioned in the introduction, it was interesting. Early last year, I had a national reporter come and talk to me. He said, why are you moving so quickly? At that point, we had passed through one of the most aggressive pro-job agendas just in the first month, even before our budget reforms. We passed some of the most positive pro-business, pro-job creation in the entire country. And this guy said, most governors haven't even figured out where all their stuff has moved into. Most new lawmakers can't find their way around the Capitol. And yet you and the new majorities in the State Assembly and the State Senate have taken this very aggressive approach when it comes to job creation in your state. Why is that? I said, all of you in business can appreciate this. You see, when I ran for governor, I spent about 18 months in a job interview for what I consider to be an interview with the people of my state to be their CEO, the CEO of their state government. And I laid out what I thought were the challenges. We faced an economic and a fiscal crisis when I was running in 2010, and then I told people what I do. And then, like anybody in business who takes over a failing company, you don't wait a year or 6 months or even a month. You start acting on it the very first day you take over the company, right? If you wait, things just get worse. In our case, Wisconsin couldn't wait. We had to take action. And so we called the legislature to a special session literally the very first day I took office. I took the oath of office, gave my speech, walked back to my conference room and handed the new Speaker of the Assembly and the new Senate Majority Leader the letter calling them into a special session. And we passed aggressive changes to help job creators in our state. We lowered the tax burden for job creators, for small businesses. We made it more attractive for investors to bring not only business, but investment into Wisconsin-based companies into our state. We lowered the overall property tax burden. In fact, we just announced yesterday that the new data shows that in actual, not estimates, property taxes went down for the first time in 12 years in the state of Wisconsin. That's after a period of time from 1998 until a year ago, where property taxes in our state went up 43%. Last year, they actually went down in the state of Wisconsin because of our reforms. We said that's important for small business owners, for family farmers, and certainly for homeowners in our state. But we did more than just tax cuts. We put in place a new system to streamline our regulatory process. So what we enforce is about common sense, not about bureaucratic red tape. In fact, our NFIB up in Wisconsin was a great partner with us. We have a whole new panel that not only can prevent bad rules from going into place in the future, we can go back and repeal bad ones that are already in the books. That's tremendously important for small businesses in our state. Because so many of the things that we have in the books, and like other states do as well, were antiquated, totally out of date, out of touch with reality. We're all for public safety and public health, but they should be science-based rules, and they should be predictable in every part of our state, in every instance out there. That's how small businesses grow. It's not just about taxation and regulatory costs, it's about litigation costs as well. For our small businesses and our family farmers, we understood that one of the biggest costs they've had in the past, one of the biggest deterrents to job growth, was the high cost of dealing with frivolous and out-of-control lawsuits in our state. So we passed major tort reform, probably the most aggressive tort reform in all of last year, that said, if you want to do business in our state, you're not going to be burdened by frivolous and out-of-control lawsuits. We even went so far as repeal. We were one of the few states left that had a state tax on health savings accounts. It was the very first law I signed into effect. It repealed within about a week or two after I took office the state tax, so that health savings accounts, which may not be for everybody, for a lot of small businesses, a lot of family farmers, even a lot of individual workers, it's a great way to find a free market-driven alternative to the higher cost of health insurance in other places. We did all that right away because we said Wisconsin couldn't wait. And the good news is it's produced results. In the 3 years before I took office, in 2008, 2009, 2010, Wisconsin lost 150,000 private sector jobs. In fact, at the peak of that, our employment rate was well above 9%. Last year, we stabilized things through our reforms, and this year, in the first 2 months of the year alone, we've seen more than 17,000 new jobs created in the private sector. In fact, our unemployment rate is now below 7%. That's the first time since 2008 we're below 7%. Now, I know you know how important that is, because at the same time we're at 6.9, Illinois is still at about the same spot it was last year at 9.1%. Is it any wonder? Because of the choices that were made right here in your state's capital. And that's part of the contrast out there. I'm going to touch on that in a second. The other things for us are the optimistic signs for the future. A couple of weeks ago, the Philadelphia Federal Reserve came out with their projections as to where each state was going to go in economic growth. They predicted they predicted that we would have rapid growth, and Manpower, another Wisconsin-based business that did projections for the next quarter, showed that there's going to be 3 times as many businesses projected through their survey to grow in Wisconsin as those going in the opposite direction. But probably for us, the most optimistic sign for the future is one you can relate to in business. You see, every year our statewide Chamber of Commerce does a survey of job creators. 2010, when I was running for governor, you know how many thought we were heading the right direction? 10%. 10% of our employers thought Wisconsin was heading the right direction. That same survey was conducted earlier this year. A couple months ago, the results came out. You know what our number's up to? 94% of our employers believe Wisconsin is heading the right direction. From 10%. Dave Sullivan knows I'm pretty competitive, so I want to know what's wrong with the other 6%. So I'm going to work pretty hard to get that done from next year's survey as well. But for us, that's a complete turnaround. And that's one where we understand that particularly for small businesses in our state, the majority of those surveyed as well said they're going to expand their company this year. Because they understand that we understand in government, not just me, not just a new governor, but a new assembly and a new senate, that we understand that it's not the government that creates jobs. It's people that create jobs. The best thing we can do is get the government out of the way, and in the instance where it's appropriate, be a good partner. But by getting the tax burden down, the regulatory costs down, the litigation costs down, by getting out of the way, and in other instances being a good partner when it comes to economic growth and prosperity, that's really what puts the people of our state back to work. Now, we got a long ways to go. We're turning things around, we're heading in the right direction, we're moving Wisconsin forward, but we got a long ways to go. But at least we're heading in the right direction. Now, the other big issue for us, and this is probably where the starkest contrast is in place between what's happening here in Springfield, and I should qualify, because what's happened under a Democrat governor and a Democrat majority of the state legislature. Because I know there are lawmakers here, Republicans, who say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't vote for all this nonsense either. But that's a stark contrast. I don't mean to be partisan, I'm just stating the facts. The simple reality is, Illinois and Wisconsin, like nearly every other state across the country last year, had big deficits to deal with. In our case, it was a $3.6 billion deficit. One of the largest in Wisconsin's history, per capita, one of the largest in the country. And we looked around at the time and we said, you know what? Other states are going to make poor decisions on how to balance the budget. We want to avoid those in Wisconsin. So we avoided tax increases. We avoided an overall tax increase. In fact, in our state, the overall tax burden went down because we understand when the economy's tough, that's the last time you want to raise taxes. That's why last year, when the legislature and the governor moved forward on a 66% increase on individual income tax, and I know that hurts today, thinking about that on tax day, and a 46% increase on businesses, Mitch Daniels and I descended on the city of Chicago, and actually Mayor Daley, who was still mayor at the time, said we were right. He said we were right. He said, no wonder that businesses are going to look at going elsewhere. I pulled out an old sticker at the time. I love people from Illinois, not just because my parents, my mom was born on a farm between Rockford and Belvedere. My dad was born at Swedish American Hospital in Rockford. So it's not just because of those roots. I love people from Illinois because I grew up in Delavan, and we had a lot of tourists, and we love people to escape up to Wisconsin and spend their summers up there. So I pulled out an old bumper sticker from when another Governor Thompson, Tommy Thompson, was the governor of Wisconsin. It was green and gold appropriately, and it said simply this: escape to Wisconsin. And I went down to Chicago after those tax increases and did interviews on TV, and I held up the sticker and said, you know, that's my response for those who are worried about the tax increases. Now Mitch apparently doesn't rely on tourism the same way we do in Wisconsin, because I think his quote ran on the front page of the Tribune the next day was simply this. He said, living next door to the Simpsons, or excuse me, living next door to Illinois is like living next door to the Simpsons. It's the dysfunctional family down the block. Now, that's Mitch Daniels. I didn't say that. I just said escape to Wisconsin. But in either case, you know, it's interesting because I think at the time there were a lot of people down here at the state capitol who were proponents of these tax increases, who looked at what was happening last year in Wisconsin, and kind of proudly said, well, we're not going to do what Wisconsin's doing. Well, clearly, state government of Illinois didn't. Because a year later after we balanced a $3.6 billion budget deficit without raising taxes, obviously things haven't gotten any better when it comes to the state budget down here. That's because when you raise taxes on individuals, when you raise taxes on businesses, that wealth and opportunity in those jobs more often than not goes somewhere else. And that's not good for anybody. Not the least of which are the people looking for work in your state, in my state, any other state across America. So we avoided the major tax increases. Not just Illinois, but other states tried to evoke last year. That's just a failed policy. But even more so, we avoided other things as well. I said, well, besides raising taxes, some states saw fit to lay off massive numbers of public employees. Illinois didn't do it at the time, but now, a year later, you know, the governor's been proposing, and what was it, closing down 14 different state facilities, including prisons, mental health complexes, halfway houses. All those things will have a negative impact on public employees in the state. We didn't have massive layoffs in Wisconsin. Other states, like Illinois, looked at cuts in core services like Medicaid. Obviously, you know, for those who watch what happens here in Springfield, the governor proposed cutting $2.7 billion from Medicaid. That's one of the biggest cuts in Medicaid in the country. Now, when you do that, one of two things happens. Medicaid provides assistance for needy families, children, and seniors in all of our states. And you either take it out of services for them, or you cut reimbursements to healthcare providers. And when you do that, what does that mean to all of you? That's a hidden tax on employers. Because they don't just eat it, they pass it on to everybody else who pays health insurance. And so one way or another, it's damning out there. Now, again, a year after those tax increases did not work here, you've got the governor proposing a $2.7 billion cut in Medicaid in the state of Illinois. You know what we did in Wisconsin? With all due respect to the media, the reality is most people in Wisconsin wouldn't know it because they think that we actually cut Medicaid. The reality is we added $1.2 billion more to Medicaid in the state of Wisconsin, one of the largest increases in the country, so that we could fund things like badger care and family care and take care of our seniors, take care of our needy families, take care of people who needed temporary assistance until they could get back up on their feet again. We were able to do that because of the reforms we put in place. And we certainly didn't make the poor choices that other states, including Wisconsin, had done in the past, which was to use budget tricks and gimmicks to balance the budget. So we didn't do all those things. We didn't do the sorts of things that you see causing even bigger troubles here in the state's capital, here in Illinois. What did we do instead? We put in place long-term structural reforms that helped us to balance not just our state budget, but our local government budgets for years to come. As I like to say in our state capital, we thought more about the next generation than we did about the next election. And isn't that what you like people to do? Yeah. Think more about the next generation than you do about the next election. That's fundamentally what we do. Because that's really the choice we have coming up in a few weeks in an election on June 5th in Wisconsin, but it's a choice you have here in Springfield and others have across the country. That's really the choice. It's why there's so many members of my fan club outside, many of them I saw last year at our state's capital when they got busted in Wisconsin. But the reality is, who's in charge? Who's in charge? Is it a handful of union bosses who get to call the shots? A handful of big government union bosses who control things in our state and local governments? Or is it the hardworking taxpayers? I don't know about all of you, but I choose the taxpayers every time. The third thing, though, that's important to tell you about is the thing you probably heard the least about, including not just around the country, but in our state, it's the thing that gets the least amount of coverage. But I think it's the most important thing that we've done in our state, the most important thing you can do here and others can do across the country. You see, we didn't just tackle our economic crisis by putting more power back in the hands of the people of our state to create jobs. We didn't just tackle our fiscal crisis by putting in place long-term structural reforms that avoided tax increases and massive layoffs and things of that nature. Probably the most important thing we did long-term was make the government work better for the people we serve. You see, for years, I think you all in business can appreciate this, for years, here in Springfield, in Madison, in Washington, all across the country, even in local governments, there's always been this false choice between either raising taxes or cutting core services. You hear it all the time, right? You hear it in your cities, your towns, you hear it in state, local governments, you hear it in federal government. Either you got to raise taxes or you got to fundamentally cut core services. That's a false choice. Who amongst you in business would say, you know what, times are tough, so I'm going to double the price of my product? You run your competitor, right? Who would say, you know what, times are tough, so I'm going to cut the quality of the product I have in half? People run your competitor as well. So what do? You use reform, you use lean manufacturing or Lean Six Sigma or total quality management, whatever the technique you pick, but you use something to create more efficiencies to balance price with quality to meet where the market is. Well, in government, we couldn't do that in the past. Overwhelmingly, it was because collective bargaining stood in the way in both our state and our local government. So by reforming that process, we allowed us to have that kind of obvious balance we have outside of government. Let me give you a great example. Comes in no better place to point this out than in education. Because my kids both go to a public high school. So I'm one of those people in the past that was pitted against myself. Either I had to pay higher property taxes on my home, or I had to run the risk of my kids not getting the kind of quality education I wanted at their school. That's a false choice. And we showed it this year. It's a great example of this is, for years in Wisconsin, almost every one of our school districts had to buy their health insurance from just one company. company that just happened to be affiliated with the teachers union. Imagine how convenient that is. Now, because of our reforms, school districts all across the state, just had one this week that announced another multi-$100,000 worth of savings. School districts all across Wisconsin can now bid their health insurance out. That has literally saved them tens of millions of dollars. That's money that goes right in the classroom to help our kids with a better education. That's a fun thing. Particularly in education, it's not always about more money, it's about spending the money you have more wisely. It's about being a better steward of the taxpayers' dollars. And it even goes beyond just finances. It goes in operations as well. A couple of years ago, long before I was governor, in the spring of 2010, there was a young woman in Milwaukee, one of our really challenged urban school districts. You've got them here in Illinois as well, and in Chicago and Rockford and East St. Louis and places like that. Well, in Milwaukee, we have an urban school district that's tremendously challenged. We had a young woman who was a new teacher, first year. She was named one of the outstanding new teachers of the year for the entire state. Not just Milwaukee, for the entire state. Great award. Exactly the kind of teacher you'd love to have in any school district, but particularly in one as challenged as the Milwaukee Public School System. About a week and a half later, she got notice. Not when the award ceremony was. She got notice she was receiving a layoff slip. Now, how could that be? One of the best teachers in the entire state, she's being laid off. We're under the old collective bargaining system. If you were the last hired, you're the first fired. If you're the last in, you're the first out. One of the great things about what we did last year, one of the things that very rarely gets covered, not only across the country, but even in our state, is the reality is that our reforms ended seniority and tenure. That means our schools can staff based on merit, they can pay based on performance. That means we can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms, and we can keep them there. Don't anyone let you tell them. What we did is fundamentally pro-education because it's about the kids and not about the bureaucracy. It's about putting the resources in the classroom. And equally as important, it's about empowering the people who went into education, the good educators of our state, the people who more often than not overwhelmingly love kids, want to inspire them, but somewhere along the line, some of them got co-opted by the union. It's empowering them to go back and do what they do best, and that is teach our children. And they get to deal with their principals and their superintendents and their school staff and not have to worry about union grievances and contracts to get it done. They can do it right in the classroom. Great testament to that is I had a superintendent of a small school district in northern Wisconsin say to me a couple months ago, he said, Governor, I love what you did. It's allowed us to save money. We hired more teachers. We lowered the classroom size. We put more resources in the merit pay. We did all these things, but as he was about to sit down, he kind of almost said halfway, he said, but the best part is I get to go back to my office and work on a curriculum instead of worrying about grievances. Of course, I said, come back up to the mic. I want everybody to hear that. That's really what it's all about. He said the best thing about our reform was he gets to focus on curriculum instead of worrying about grievances. You see, balancing a budget is great. Improving the economy is awesome. But long term, the most important thing that will have an impact on my kids and their kids is that we made the government in our state, at both the state and the local level, work better for the people we're elected to serve. That's what this is all about. Now, at any other time, in any other circumstance, helping the people of your state create more jobs, helping improve your fiscal standing, not through one-time gimmicks or other problems, but instead, not through tax increases or layoffs or things of that nature, but instead through long-term structural reforms, and most importantly, making the government work better for the people you serve. Well, a couple of years in 2014, in any other time, in any other place, that'd be a pretty compelling argument for re-election, wouldn't it? And then I'm facing a recall election. Why is it? Well, it's because not just the people outside, but the people who directed them to come outside. A handful of big government union bosses, not just in my state, but particularly in Washington, think that I'm standing in the way of their power and their money. See, it's not just about what we did there, it's also about the fact that in doing this, and moving this forward, we gave the public employees in our state, overwhelmingly, we give the vast majority of public employees in our state the freedom to choose. Freedom to choose about whether they want to be a public employee union or not. And in doing so, they can decide whether they want to take that union money, which might be $1,400, $1,500 that a school teacher in Milwaukee is paying, and instead spend that on their pension contribution or their health insurance premium, or maybe set a little bit of money aside for their kids' college education, they can choose to keep that for themselves. And unfortunately, the handful of those union bosses don't like that very much. Because like most of us, if you can choose, you're going to choose to keep it for yourself. You're going to spend it on your own family, your own resources, your own needs out there. And that for them is really what this is all about. For us, it's about something fundamental as well, but it's not about that money, it's not even about the union. I believe what's at stake right now, not just in Wisconsin, but elsewhere, is ultimately about courage. You see, and it's kind of appropriate thinking about being here, not just in Springfield, but being in the land of Lincoln. Because a lot of times in politics, I hear all the time over the years from people who complain to me, it doesn't matter Republican or Democrat alike, I hear voters all the time say to me, why is it that so many people get elected to office and then they fail to take on the tough issues we all know need to be taken on? Why is it? I hear that. It doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, somewhere in between. I hear that about our state, I hear that about our federal government, I hear about our local officials all the time. Why is it that people get into office and they fail to have the courage to take on the tough issues? In our case, we took on the tough issues. We didn't take them on because of some group or party or anybody else. I took them on for two very simple reasons. One's named Matthew, the other's named Alex. Those are my two sons. Every kid and grandkid in our state, I want to make sure, Tonette and I want to make sure, for just like every other mom and dad in our state, that our kids don't inherit a debt bigger than they can handle. And that they're in a state where someday when they get out of college, they have an opportunity, not a guarantee, but an opportunity to get a job in the state that we love. That's what this is all about. Now I ultimately believe the majority of people in our state believe the same thing. So I think on June 5th, you're going to ultimately see that when we prevail, I think it's not just a powerful message in Madison, in my state house. I think right here in Springfield. I think over in Indianapolis and St. Paul and in Austin and Columbus, in state houses all across America, it will send a powerful, powerful message, but even more so in the halls of Congress and our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. I think when we prevail, it will send a powerful, powerful message. If you stand up, if you take on the tough issues, if you do what we all know is right and is just and is appropriate for the time, that ultimately there'll be people standing there with you. And it's my hope, being here today, well, not just with those politicians in office in your state capital now, but more so even in the future. Think about the fact that elections are important because the people you put in office, will ultimately make decisions not just for today, but more importantly for tomorrow. That's what we've got to do more about. We've got to spend more of our time in this country thinking about that next generation and not just getting past the next election. Now I think, again, being in the land of Lincoln, it's very appropriate that we talk a bit about courage because obviously, probably more so than just about any president out there, Abraham Lincoln exhibited courage, even the darkest of times. But in the end, because of his devotion to move a united country forward, we ultimately have the great country that we live in. And that's why it's moments like that, coming here today, thinking about not just Springfield, but thinking about President Lincoln. I remember I was in Philadelphia back in September. And for me, growing up in a small town, the son of a preacher, for us, the extended vacations were usually about as far away as our old white station wagon could get in one day and back. So I never got to Washington or Philadelphia as a kid. But I loved history. And I always thought of our founders, our leaders in our country as being bigger than life, almost superhero-like. And so last September I had a chance to speak at a Governors Association meeting in Philadelphia. Tonette and I got up early in the morning. We went over to Independence Hall. Obviously we saw the Liberty Bell. One of the most inspiring things for me in white ties and what I'm talking about today is I stood in Independence Hall. If anyone's ever been there, you know it's about double the size of this stage up here. It's not very big. This is going to be exciting. It was, kind of coming into the enclave of the superheroes I thought of as a kid. You look at the chairs, and they're not much different than the chairs we're sitting in here right now. And you see up at the front, there's a desk, and there's a chair with a half-rising sun on it where Washington sat. And you realize these were ordinary people. Ordinary people who did something quite extraordinary. They didn't just risk their political careers. They didn't just risk their businesses. These were people, as Ben Franklin said, when he said, we don't hang together, surely we'll hang separately. These were people who literally risked their lives For the freedoms we hold dear today, far too many of our fellow citizens take for granted. The reason I tell you that is I'm always inspired by the history of our great country. Whether it's our founders back in Philadelphia, people like President Lincoln who came out of this great state, there's so many other leaders along the way, what has made America great, what has made America exceptional, what has made the United States of America arguably the greatest country in the history of the world, is in times of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, what has made America great has been the fact that we've had men and women of courage who've been willing to stand up and think more about the future of their children and of their grandchildren than they thought of their own political futures. Let this be our call to action. Let this be one of those moments in time where not only in Wisconsin or Illinois, but all across this great country, that we stand up and we tell our children and our grandchildren that this is the time when we stood up and said it's time to think about the future, not just about the past and the present. It's time to move our states and our country forward. Thank you for the chance to share, and I appreciate being here today.
Wow.